Good morning, I'm Tom at Ledgemere. Behind me you see a 1950 John Deere B, and this tractor belonged to my late cousin Ray. He and my brother and I, unfortunately my brother has also passed away, used to go to tractor parades, and sometimes when I would go I would say, hey Ray, when you get ready to sell that B, let me know because I kind of like it. He would just be like, I don't want to sell it. So after he passed away, when his widow approached me and asked me if I'd like to have it, it didn't take me very long to say how long before I could come over and get it. Well, during the interim I was trying to find more information on the John Deere B, and there wasn't a whole lot out there, surprisingly, on YouTube to find facts and figures and features of the John Deere B. So I did some research on my own, and I'm going to tell you what I've learned, and hopefully this will help the next person who decides they want to go buy a John Deere B. So stick around for a few minutes, grab a cup of coffee, and let's talk about the John Deere B. I'm going to tell you everything I know. By the mid-1920s, John Deere had the Model D well established. It was still a big, heavy tractor, and farmers who used the D basically regarded it as a plowing tractor or a tractor that would move the thresher from place to place. And the steam traction engine had been around for a number of years. And so the horses, as far as threshing wheat, that had been replaced in the 30s. A man named Theo Brown, who worked for John Deere, he started working on a design that ultimately became the John Deere A and the B. The A came out in 1934, the B came out in 35. They were essentially launched together like the Farmall H&M. The B was roughly 2/3 the size of the A, like the H was roughly 2/3 the size of the M. Because the factory could only produce a certain amount of things, a finite amount of products at one time, the A came out first. And the A and the GP were pretty similar in horsepower, but they were totally different animals. So John Deere's real intention was to go after those row crop farmers. A team of horses could do a lot, but they would tire, so most farmers would have 2 or 3 teams of horses. So when I say they were designed to replace 6 horses, it wasn't 6 horses hitched together, it was 3 teams or 2 teams of horses. So the B was essentially designed to replace 2 teams and the A 3 teams. When the B came out, it was designed as a garden tractor, and it soon proved itself to be much more valuable and viable in other scenarios. Into the 1930s, other manufacturers were using 4 and 6 cylinder engines. John Deere stuck with 2, and nobody knows exactly for sure why, although the theory behind it is that they had such overwhelming success with the John Deere D, which was a 2-cylinder tractor. The parts were big, the parts were easy to replace, they were easy to work on. So the thought process was, let's just keep a good thing going, right? So they entered the long green line of 2-cylinder John Deere tractors. John Deere tractors are probably one of the most highly prized and collectible tractors, and nobody knows exactly why. It may be because they like the sound of the engines, it may be because they like the color, it may be because people remember driving them when they were a kid. It could just be people think that John Deere is associated with agriculture, and all of those things are true to some extent. The John Deere A and B essentially went through 3 generations. The first generation was, and this is a G, but they're pretty much the same. They call these the unstyled versions, and so you can see the steering posts and the pedestals all exposed. The G actually, even though it was modernized and became the GM, the G never put their muffler and air cleaner in line like with the A and B, and some people used it like a gun sight to see down the rows, but the B and the A looked pretty much like this initially until 1939, when a man named Henry Dreyfus was contracted through John Deere. John Deere B initially was 17 horsepower, and it was measured in 3 different ways. It was measured on the power takeoff, the belt, and the drawbar. But this is a John Deere A, and this is another whole story about Fred Ertl and his success. He worked for John Deere, and he had old aircraft pistons, melted them down at his house, and he started building toy tractors, and this was one of his first toy tractors. The first design of John Deere looked like the G I sold you. The second design, after Dreyfus's design was accepted, looked much the same as this one here. The differences were that the seat was still a pan seat. The flywheel was exposed, and one interesting thing about when you look at the manuals for John Deere tractors, they don't say, you know, left side, right side, rear, front. They say flywheel side or pulley. So pretty much the same in design as you see here. But when they came out in 1948 with this revised design, they increased the horsepower again. And so basically you have 3 different generations of the John Deere tractor. So it's very important if you're getting parts for the A or the B or the G that you are in the right serial number range. Otherwise you'll find that the parts just don't fit. The motor was completely different in 1948 than it was in 1930. Electric lighting was standard. First Model Bs that came off the line actually were shown with headlights on them, but they were always an option, as were fenders. With over 300,000 units made, this was John Deere's most popular tractor, and that's why it's probably one of the top collectible tractors. It's not because it's anything special, it's just because there's so many out there. There's so many parts available, and people just associate the old John Deere tractors as a 2-cylinder tractor, tricycle front end, and the hand clutch. All of those things just are what John Deere was famous for. The John Deere row crop model far outsold the high crop models, they called it the John Deere B wide, the BW, because it had a wide front end. There was the BR, which was the standard version with non-adjustable wheels. There was the B narrow, which had a single front tire on it, and they had a wider rear axle so they could span more rows. All of the Bs before 1941 only had a 4-speed transmission. All of the Bs after 1941 had a 6-speed transmission. And unlike the A where it had a high and low, the Bs were all just a series of gates. With this 3rd generation introduced in 1948, this pressed steel frame replaced the angle iron, and it worked okay. It made the tractor lighter, although it wasn't quite as rugged as the angle iron. So when they came out with the John Deere 50 in 1952, they had kind of gone back to the angle iron frame again. You can see this one's been welded in a couple places. There's one here, and somebody welded something here. The way 2-cylinder John Deere tractors were cooled was through a process called Thermo Siphon, and actually my Farmall Cub does the same thing. So you've got the engine here, and one quick thing about the engine is they're 2 cylinders horizontal and they're 180 degrees out. So when one's at 0, one's at 180. So the way Thermo Siphon works is you've got your cool liquid here. This is your bottom radiator pipe. So it puts coolant into the engine here. It heats up, forms a gas, and the vapor comes out the top here, and then here's your top radiator hose, which is actually a piece of pipe about this big on the in and out. So you've got your steam coming in. The steam's up here, it cools down, turns back to liquid, and then goes back out the bottom. And so you've got a big fan and then here's your fan shaft here turning off the motor over there. So this saved you a lot of maintenance on the tractor too, because you didn't need a fan belt, because there's no water pump. Look at all those things you don't have to replace. This right here is your fuel sediment bowl. You can see how nice and clean it is now that I've cleaned everything out. So your fuel comes in here, and here's a shut off on it, and any dirt and sediment will come down here into this, and all you have to do is loosen this up, pop that glass out, dump it, wipe it out with a rag, and then put it back, and you're cleaned up and ready to go. There's also a filter screen here and one here. Rear wheel tread was adjusted by jacking up the back of the tractor one side, loosen up the bolts, and then you could slide it in and out on the spline shaft to whatever position you wanted, and then tighten it back up. All through its production run, John Deere used the Dltx Carburetor built by Marvel Shebler, and although it was the same manufacturer, there were 3 or 4 different designs, but they were all specific to a certain serial. They used the Dltx 67 on the gas jobs and a 73 on the all fuel. You see it on Farmall Cubs too. People didn't want to take the hood off to do service on it. Well, people on John Deere Bs didn't want to take the hood off to replace the muffler, so usually a cold chisel and a hammer was the implemented destruction. They would chop a hole in the hood so that they could get at the bolts that held the muffler on. And you want to make sure your clutch is out. And then you want to make sure your gear shift is in neutral, say, and then about half throttle. And so I'm just stepping on one brake, and then I'm gonna hit the starter button. Hopefully this has been mildly entertaining for you. I appreciate all the commentary. I'm also very humbled by those of you who subscribe to the channel. Thank you for watching and hope you have a great day.